I'd been in pretty progressive parishes, and I had, at the time, was at St. Timothy's in Blaine, which is a team parish. There's three of us priests sharing the leadership, which is another new model of, and I wasn't ready to move on, but the Archbishop indicated that I was, and there was a number of possible. One was to go to St. Luke's over in St. Paul, which is on Summit Avenue, right across from and the other was Pax Christi. Or he said I could stay another year at St. Tim's. And kind of doing some discerning, I thought, well, maybe it is time to move. And my inclination was St. Luke's, kind of inner city, changing neighborhood, and not being out with all those affluent, rich people in Eden. I mean, I was prejudiced. Until a friend of mine said, well, Tim, if you really want to be with the poor, go down to Haiti. He said, the difference between St. Luke's and Pax Christi on a spectrum is about this much. So I kind of reevaluated, and usually before I make a major decision, I read one of the Gospels from beginning to end, usually Mark, because it's the shortest. And so I came to that part in Mark where it's impossible for the rich to get into heaven, you know, the camel thing. And I said, okay, I got to go to St. Luke's. And then God said, well, finish the gospel. You're not done with it. And the apostles say, well, isn't that a tough saying? And Jesus says, yes, but with God, everything is possible. And I realized I was going on my own image of what was needed rather than following God's lead. So it was a wonderful decision because, like I said, I found very faithful people here and creative people, and joined them. I don't know how the Archbishop said, well, yeah, I'll appoint him if that's where he wants to go. So I began with a parish that was already empowered by themselves. I mean, they knew the power of being the people of God. And so from the very beginning we were saying, okay, we're 20 years away from Vatican II. What are some of the things that we've learned over the 20 years? So it was lay empowerment, creativity, justice, collaboration, feeling very blessed to begin with, not having a place, there wasn't a place in Eden Prairie big enough to have a regular service. So on weekends, at the beginning, we had 3 different places. One was Saturday night Mass at Community Cross Lutheran Church over by Dred Scott. And Sunday morning was the 9 o'clock at the Radisson South. And then 11 o'clock was at one of the Eden Prairie schools, eventually Central Middle School. And we called it a movable feast. Somebody gave us an old station wagon and a sound system and an altar and banners. And we could hit a place like the Radisson and within about 20 minutes be set up. Everything was on wheels. And so that lasted a couple of years till we realized we were really creating 3 new parishes, 3 different, and said that isn't going to be good. So that's when we rented a warehouse over in Bloomington. And that was a couple of years till we bought land and started building. And technically that was in St. Patrick's Parish in Edina. So for a while I was an associate pastor so that the sacramental things I did were legal at the warehouse. The one thing we couldn't do at the warehouse is funerals. The neighboring businesses didn't want a hearse sitting out there. So, but we had weddings, we had celebrations, and then eventually found a piece of land and built, and and moved in. One of the challenges that we embraced right away in terms of structure and deciding what was going to happen was we knew that no matter how big we got, we'd probably only have one priest full-time. So everything we structured was to not kill that one priest. So each year I had a yearly review with the council, and so they would ask, what is Tim doing that somebody else could do? So that, it kept me alive. It kept me from being just sucked under stuff and kept me creative. You literally have to be where you're planted. And I was planted in a very good place. First of all, Pax had this unique beginning of lay people kind of going to the diocese. Usually the diocesan planning commission would decide when there's a new parish and what its name was going to be and who the pastor is going to be. And most of you have kids. You realize kids drive where you worship many times because that's where they go to school, that's where their friends are. And so St. Edward's was the closest Catholic parish, and these people said, we need a Catholic parish in Eden Prairie. Our kids, that's growing out there. So somehow they went and convinced the bishop's office that it was time to do a parish out here. They did all the research and got names and showed statistics. And then they were not only settled with that, they kind of suggested that they should be the ones that name it. And not only that they should have a voice in who the first pastor was going to be. I mean, this was kind of unheard of back in the early 80s. So we were given permission to come up with a name, that the Archbishop would agree or not agree. But so we had some great discussions. Eden Prairie, perfect for the parish of St. Francis. But again, these were very progressive people, and they said, we're not going to just have a male saint. If it's St. Francis, then it has to be St. Clare. So the suggestion was floating around for a while, St. Francis and St. Clare Parish. And then somebody says, well, those are adults. We got to represent the youth, so Maria Goretti. So it was St. Francis, St. Clare, St. Maria. Well, the litany, when you start including everybody. So that we were not going to be able to find a name that was going to be able to do that in terms of names of saints or people. So then you got these, Maranatha Catholic community, Beacon of Light Catholic community, stuff that you'd go, that's not Catholic, is it? And eventually one of the people on the steering committee had an aunt who was a nun, and she suggested Pax Christi because it was traditional, and we wanted to, we are in the Catholic tradition, and Pax Christi is the Latin, but it was also the name of the international peace movement in the Catholic Church. And we had a real sense that we needed to be about justice. So it fit both bills. It had that traditional Latin sound, and yet it put us squarely in the fact of being that movement in the Catholic Church that was justice-orientated. I would say we had a lot of fun. Being a new parish, there were no traditions, so everything was fresh, and you didn't have to say, well, we did that last year. And we just got very creative. Like in summer, we'd have these liturgies, picnic Sunday, where we'd invite people to come and just have a picnic on the lawn afterwards, or bike to church Sunday, or a graffiti Sunday where we'd have big things where people could come up and write. Or I remember we had one, we had big buttons, I am over 60. I mean, we were a pretty young parish. So we celebrated the few people in the parish that were over 60 by giving them buttons and stuff. When we eventually built the church, rather than traditional saints' names for the rooms, we said, who are inspirational people. So Bill W. Lounge, Anne Frank Library, some of those kind of things. We made some mistakes trying to be too creative. Our first collection we decided to give away, not knowing that the tradition was neighboring parishes that the new parish was carved out of always gave a special collection to get you started that first Sunday. So, but we said, hey, we got a long way to go, and we'll eventually, this isn't bad. And it began our tradition of trying to tithe and to say, we're a blessed parish, we're in a very affluent part of town, so let's always give some of our collection away. Our goal was 10%, eventually we got up to 10%. When it came time in terms of the building, interesting story behind the baptismal font. We were down to having only so much money left, and there were two projects. One was, would we equip a kitchen with stoves and refrigerators and all that kind of stuff, or would we put in a baptismal font? And long discussions. How can you have a church without kitchen? And yet, the newness of having a baptismal font where somebody could go in and actually get immersed, which obviously won out because we said, if we don't build it now, we'll never build it. And we'll always get a kitchen. Somebody will always, we'll find a way to cook a meal or something. I remember the first time I baptized somebody in the font. Never having done it before, I went over to Wooddale and checked with the pastor over there because that's the tradition. So he says, well, you borrow somebody's hunting boots and then you just put your robe over that. And so I went out and borrowed somebody's waders and then, Holy Saturday we start with the lighting of the candle and the procession in and the darkness. And I could see as the lights started coming on, people looking, what's he got under his robe? And it started to dawn on me that a place like Wooddale is not a liturgical church. So the pastor leaves the service, gets dolled up, goes up, they open the curtain, they baptize, close the curtain, he gets dressed, comes back. We have processions, and so everybody was really kind of watching how I waddled around. I mean, it's kind of hard to process real nicely with a waiter under your alb. And then I remember getting in the font, and I hadn't checked out the waiters, and they leaked. So I found different ways of doing it now. Now you just go and change, and so that was a great experience, though, that actually baptized somebody in immersion. So we knew that was the future of the church. We were just not going to have a lot of extra priests. Tried to find the best of the best to help out on weekends, and we did. We had Ken Pierre and Dick Rice, and so that was, it was great days. So I'm feeling like I was really the lucky guy. Fast-growing area. We had, about every time we added another 500 households, we had to restructure and say what worked at 500 households is not working at 1,000. What's working at 1,000 is not working at 1,500. So it kept us on our toes, and that was fun. Well, like I said, we spent a lot of time. We eventually, for a long time, had two different leadership groups. Eventually, our parish director, Jerry Roth, helped us develop what is now the different ministries, councils, and which he's exported to a lot of other parishes. But early on, there are two things we didn't want to lose. One is those who are dreaming about what could be, and those who are responsible to the day-to-day, the practical stuff. So for those first 5, 6, 7 years, we had 2 different groups going on, and one was, their whole responsibility was just dreaming. They get together and say, where should we be, and what are some principles? So they're the ones that eventually named justice, collaboration, solidarity, and then the others were, got to do a budget, got to do job reviews, got to hire and fire. So those 2 things kind of kept balancing. And sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. The group that I think got kind of caught is the full-time staff. And one of the things we've tried to focus on is hire staff that would enable ministry, teach others how to do ministry. And that was tough because most people go into church ministry because they love doing it. So you mean I'm not going to visit hospitals all the time? I have to develop this team that's going to do it? I want to do it. So there's tensions as we grew, but healthy ones as we kind of worked that out. And like I say, eventually came with this model that is there now, where the different ministries and people are discerned, and which I think is a wonderful, they all meet together, they interact. Other creativity things were kind of more focused. We had these great opportunities that came along. One of which somebody came and gave a donation to the church, and they said, this isn't for the mortgage, and we don't want you to use it for just regular stuff. Find some creative way to use this. And so we spent some time thinking about it and came up with the idea of a visiting staff fund, to bring somebody on staff that you'd never hire full-time, but would add to the vibrancy of the parish. And our first visiting staff was a Dominican priest who was retired, had spent a lot of his time working in the Chicagoan streets and knew justice stuff. And we hired him as our conscience. And he was to kind of spend a couple of months among us and tell us if we were really living up to our name, the peace of Christ. And so his name was Jerry McMullen. He was a Dominican priest. And he would come and sit at meetings and talk to people and read stuff and just kind of hang out. And eventually he was ready for his report, and we were thinking, oh, we probably have to go into the city more. We should be doing more in terms of, activation at the Capitol. And, we were ready to kind of get, you're not really doing as radical stuff as you should be doing. And his report said there are 2 areas that you are very unjust in. Gee, what is this going to be? And he says, one is you have no programs for adult formation, and you're cheating your adults in the parish. And you have a terrible youth ministry program, so you're not preparing, and it just confirmed having somebody from the outside living with you, reflecting on what you're doing. One year we set aside an amount of money, and any of the ministries could dip into that to use music in their ministry. So you'd have a little band out there on Sunday morning on the plaza, or different groups would say, I want to invite a violinist to just have kind of quiet music at our next meeting. And so there's great opportunities like that, that kind of have something that was very creative. Another area that I realized we were very blessed in is, over the years there was a number of nonprofits that grew out of Pax Christi. Ideas that were very good for the parish, but eventually needed more room. Obviously the biggest one was bridging. And I think there's different stories as to how bridging really got going. Fran Heitzman was our maintenance man, and somebody brought him a crib one day and said, I don't need this anymore, but could you, and he found somebody at Catholic Charities, and it just triggered in his mind, there's got to be a lot of things out there that people don't need anymore. today, some 25 years later, it's the largest furniture for the poor in the country. And we're just finishing up a fund drive to buy a second warehouse up in Roseville. So that was, I mean, a little idea that kind of grew and is now independent and nationally known. So those are just a few things of being in a parish where there's very entrepreneurial people, and you get an idea and you say, let it go, let it go. That was great stuff. I'm not sure where the all are welcome eventually came, but as there was more of a reaction in the church, I think all are welcome fits Francis. I mean, but before Francis, we had to kind of come to it on our own. And so as issues like gay and lesbian and people who didn't buy the whole Catholic stuff but still found a richness in the way we celebrated our liturgies. And so we were able to say, if you're not a baptized Catholic and you're nurtured here, come. You know, worship with us, join if you want, or just... so it was not just the controversial stuff. It was saying that we wanted to be a place that offered a slice of Christianity that was vibrant and rich, and if that nurtured you, you come on in, whether you had the Catholic label on you or not. So there's a good number of families where partners never did go through RCIA or officially become Catholic, but they would call themselves Catholic, and just because they felt that they could come. So that little moniker out on the bell in the corner is good. I feel I was blessed to pastor a parish during some of the most creative times in the last 50 years of the church. We had an archbishop who was very open to diversity. I mean, he could support St. Agnes, which is the church that did everything in Latin over in St. Paul, as well as a Joan of Arc, which was kind of out there to us who... and we pushed a button. I mean, we did some stuff that was kind of beyond the pale, but that was the time to do it. And like I say, we had the resources, we had that support. So I feel, and I hope, you know, some of this was taken back. The leadership in the church decided that the third form of confession was, you know, to be shut down, and lay preaching was to be shut down. And I really hope some of that comes back. I think Francis has brought some of that back. I think there was a fear that we were moving too quickly, too fast. As I look back now and said, if I was just planted now in a new parish or some ministry, there's some real challenges that I pray for the new leadership in the church. One of which is I've seen many too many good women walk away from the church in my time, who just couldn't. Good people love the church, love the Gospels, but couldn't abide by the fact that there just was no room for them. So that's a huge loss. I don't know if we'll get those back. A second is the scandal, and it's going to take us years to recover from that. A lot of those people have left and they're not coming back. And so the resources and the numbers are going to be a challenge. I think hopefully we're close to turning the corner in some of that in this diocese, but that would be a huge challenge. And the third are the nuns. They keep asking what denomination you belong to. And 10 years ago it was like 2% said we belong to none. And that's, I think, closer to 30% now. And these are the people who just cannot find nourishment, and it's not just the Catholic Church. And they're very spiritual. I think there's a great hunger there, but I think that's going to be one of the challenges for organized church, to how do we tap that? So there's some real challenges which I'd love to rip into if I was. Yeah, I mean, that would just be fun to try and wrestle with those things. But I would see that as some three things that you could be creative about. You could try some new stuff, but big challenges. Some of it deserved, some of it not deserved. So like putting in the baptismal font, people would come and go, oh, or not having kneelers, because we wanted the space to be used for other things. But what I would often tell people is our goal was to be the most traditional parish in the diocese, in terms of going back to the early church, where the people gathered in small communities, carved out a part of the gospel. I mean, we forget that the early church had a great diversity. The Johannine community, had conflicts with the Mark community, had conflicts with the Matthew community, and each of them kind of carved out a piece of the gospel that they preserved, and was different than. So from the very beginning, there was this diversity, and for parishes to be diverse was, I think, a necessity to stay healthy. So I could, if somebody came and just couldn't abide by Pax Christi, I could tell them, go over to St. Agnes and St. Paul, because that's where your hunger is, and you're never going to be nurtured here. It'll drive you crazy, because we're celebrating this tradition or this part of the gospel. But people would scratch their head and say, the most traditional parish. And it's just that we didn't want to get stuck in the medieval stuff, which many people, saw as the church. And so, yeah, we pushed, and the lay preaching and doing some alternate prayers as part of the Eucharistic prayer and stuff was well beyond the pall, but it touched people. It was something new and fresh, and they go, did I just hear what I heard? I've told people a number of times the first time we had one of our women lay preachers vested and preaching after the gospel, and I looked out and I saw a number of grown women with tears in their eyes. And I thought, this is good. This is something that they've had a hunger for. And so I see, the more I know of church history, the more I'm encouraged that the Spirit is going to work, and you just got to be ready to kind of pounce on it when the Spirit's going to move you.